My name is Alara Vance, and for the last 10 months, I have been learning to navigate the world as a singular entity, a solo rower on a vast and unpredictable sea. At 35, I am a widow, a mother, and a resident of Portland, Oregon, a city that weeps with me, its gentle, persistent rain a constant companion to my own quiet grief. My son, Leo, who is 8, is my anchor and my sail. He has his father's eyes, the color of the sky just before a storm, and a curiosity as boundless as the Oregon coastline. We live in a small craftsman bungalow in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, its eaves heavy with moss, its garden a testament to my late husband Ben's love for unruly, beautiful things. Ben was an architect, a poet of steel and glass, and he saw the soul in structures others saw only as utilitarian. He was inspecting the Fremont Bridge, a grand old dame of our city, when a fatigued steel plate gave way. One moment he was there, a solid, warm presence in my life, and the next, he was a memory, a collection of blueprints, half-read books, and a scent that still lingered on his favorite flannel shirt. The world contracted into a tunnel of paperwork and hollow-eyed condolences. It was Ben's parents, Martha and David, who held the light at the end of that tunnel. They are people carved from kindness and resilience, their home in the West Hills a sanctuary of warmth, smelling of baking bread and David's pipe tobacco. They would appear on my doorstep with casseroles, or simply to sit with me in silence, their presence a comforting weight in the empty house. They insisted on picking Leo up from Abernethy School every afternoon, giving me the space to breathe, to work at my job as a senior graphic designer for Willamette Weekly, and to simply fall apart when I needed to. Their love was a current that kept me from drifting away entirely, but it often came with a gesture that made me profoundly uncomfortable. "Alara, honey, just a little something for groceries," Martha would say, her voice soft as she tried to tuck a folded check into my tote bag as I picked up Leo. Her hands, wrinkled from a lifetime of gardening and giving, were always gentle. "Martha, please," I'd say, pushing it back just as gently. "We're okay. Truly. We know you are, dear. But we're his grandparents. It's what we do." The settlement from Ben's firm had been generous, $450,000, a sum that felt both obscene and inadequate as compensation for a life. It sat in a carefully managed investment account, a sacred trust for Leo's future, a future Ben would never see. Financially, we were secure. But Martha and David's offerings weren't about money. They were a manifestation of their love, a tangible way to care for the two pieces of their son left in the world. My own parents, Richard and Helen, lived on the other side of the river, both geographically and emotionally. Their home in Dunthorpe was a monument to order and quiet judgment, a pristine landscape of cream-colored carpets and art that was chosen for its investment value rather than its beauty. Growing up, I was the quiet, dreamy child, while my older sister, Claire, was the pragmatic, high-achieving one. She was the sun in their solar system, and I, a distant, dimly lit moon. That dynamic hadn't changed. It had simply extended to the next generation. Claire's two children, the perpetually screen-absorbed Maya and Noah, were paragons of modern childhood in my parents' eyes. My Leo, with his whirlwind of questions and his uncontainable zest for discovery, was a problem to be managed. I learned early to build a fortress around my heart during our obligatory Sunday visits, to brace myself for the subtle and not-so-subtle comparisons. I did it for Leo, who, despite it all, adored his grandparents and craved their attention. But each visit felt like a small erosion of my spirit, a reminder that in the family I was born into, love felt conditional, and approval was a currency I never seemed to have enough of to spend. I didn't know then how much more it was about to cost me. The air in my parents' home always felt different, thinner, cooler, and scented with a faint, floral polish that seemed to coat everything, including conversation. Our little bungalow was a place of comfortable chaos, with Leo's Lego creations colonizing the coffee table and the scent of damp earth and coffee grounds in the air. Here, in my parents' house, every surface gleamed, Every cushion was plumped, and silence was the preferred state of being. Last Sunday had been a perfect, painful diorama of our family dynamic. Leo, his face alight with excitement, had spotted a beautiful, intricate model of a clipper ship inside a glass bottle on the mantelpiece. "Grandpa, how did they get the ship in there?" he'd asked, his nose nearly pressed against the glass. "Were the sails already up? Did they use tiny, tiny tools?" My father, Richard, looked up from his financial news, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "It's a puzzle, Leo. A clever trick." "But how?" Leo pressed, his mind whirring. "Did they build it inside? What kind of wood is it? Is it a real ship that existed?" "Alara, can you please have him settle down?" my mother, Helen, said with a sigh, not looking at me but at the space just over my shoulder. Claire's children are so good at entertaining themselves quietly. I glanced over at my sister and her husband, Mark, who were seated on the opposite sofa. Maya and Noah, aged 10 and 12, were side by side, their faces illuminated by the blue light of their tablets, thumbs flying across the screens in some silent, digital battle. They hadn't said a word to anyone in an hour. This, to my parents, was exemplary behavior. "He's just curious, Mom," I said, my voice softer than the protest in my heart. My father stood up and walked over to Leo. For a moment, I hoped he might engage, might see the spark in his grandson's eyes and fan the flame. Instead, he pulled his own phone from his pocket. "Here, Leo. I downloaded a new racing game for you. It's much more fun than an old boat." Leo's face fell, the light in his eyes dimming. He took the phone without argument, his shoulders slumping as he retreated to a corner of the room. He didn't want a game. He wanted a connection. He wanted to share a sense of wonder. I watched the exchange, a familiar ache settling in my chest. It was the ache of being misunderstood, of having your very nature seen as a flaw. I had felt it my entire life in this house. Now I had to watch my son feel it too. I had learned to swallow my words, to let the unfair comparisons wash over me. What was the point? Arguing only ever led to accusations of being too sensitive or dramatic. So I sat in silence, a polite guest in my own family, and watched as my parents praised Claire for her children's placid disinterest, holding it up as a gold standard of parenting. Still, they were my parents. They were Leo's only other grandparents. And sometimes, on the rare occasion that Martha and David were both unavailable, they would agree to watch Leo if I had a late project deadline at the magazine. The help was infrequent and often felt begrudging, but it was help nonetheless, and I was grateful for it. I held onto those small instances of support like a lifeline, convincing myself that beneath the layers of criticism and favoritism, there was a bedrock of love. It was a Tuesday in early October when that bedrock began to feel like quicksand. The Portland sky was a moody gray, and the air was crisp with the promise of autumn. I had an evening meeting with a new client, and my parents had agreed to have Leo for dinner. When I walked in to drop him off, the first warning sign was the aroma wafting from the kitchen. It was my mother's cioppino, a rich, fragrant seafood stew she only made on special occasions, or when she wanted something. The second sign was my father's demeanor. He was uncharacteristically effusive, pulling me into a stiff, awkward hug and asking detailed questions about my work, about the magazine's circulation, about Leo's school. It was a performance of interest, and the artifice was jarring. They were building a stage, setting a scene. I just didn't know what play was about to be performed. We sat at the long, polished mahogany dining table, Leo happily slurping his tomato broth and my parents exchanging subtle, charged glances over his head. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Finally, as my mother meticulously deshelled a prawn, she cleared her throat. "So, Alara," she began, her voice carefully neutral, "your father and I have been meaning to ask you something." She placed the perfect curl of prawn on her plate and looked at me, her eyes unblinking. "That settlement from Ben's firm, how much was it, exactly?" The question landed in the quiet room like a dropped stone, its ripples spreading through me in a cold shock. My breath caught in my throat. It was so bald, so utterly devoid of delicacy or empathy. It wasn't a question born of concern. It was an inquiry born of calculation. For a wild moment, I considered lying, deflecting, telling them it was none of their business. But a lifetime of conditioning, of being the compliant daughter, took over. Maybe a small, foolish part of me thought, if I was just honest, this awkwardness would pass. It was $450,000, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My mother's fork clattered against her china plate. My father, who had been studying the wine in his glass, snapped his head up, his expression one of undisguised astonishment. They stared at me, not as a grieving daughter, but as if I had just revealed a winning lottery ticket. Well, my father said, recovering first and setting his glass down with a decisive thud. Well, and what are your plans for a sum like that? I could feel their expectations in the air, a heavy, suffocating pressure. It's been invested, I explained, forcing my voice to remain steady. It's for Leo. For his education, a down payment on a home someday. It's what Ben would have wanted. But that's decades away, Alara, my mother interjected, her earlier pretense of delicacy gone. You have to think about the here and now. You have to think about family. The way she said family sent a chill down my spine. It was a word she wielded like a weapon, and it was never aimed to include just me and Leo. It was the same tone she'd used when explaining why they'd given Claire and Mark a substantial gift to help with the down payment on their sprawling house in Lake Oswego. It was the same tone they'd used when they'd written a check to fund my sister's extravagant wedding at the Portland Art Museum, a wedding I, as the maid of honor, had helped pay for with my own modest savings. You could do so much good with that money now, my father added, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming. You could help the people who have always been there for you, the people who need it. You can't just squirrel it all away for some far-off future that might never come. The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. My future, Leo's future, was uncertain. Their needs were immediate. The cioppino soured in my stomach. I'm not going to discuss my finances, I said, the words coming out sharper and colder than I intended. This money is for my son. A heavy silence descended upon the table. My father leaned back, his face clouding over with that look of profound disappointment that had been the backdrop of my childhood. My mother pressed her lips into a thin, hard line, a storm warning I knew all too well. Leo, oblivious, asked for another piece of garlic bread, and the tension was momentarily broken. But the stage had been set, and I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that this was only the first act. I thought the chill from that Tuesday dinner would last for weeks. In the past, when I had failed to meet an unspoken expectation, my parents' response was a punitive silence, a cold shoulder that could last until I offered up an apology for a crime I hadn't known I'd committed. But to my surprise, my mother called a week later, her voice as warm and smooth as honey. "Darling, we're having a proper family dinner on Sunday," she announced, as if our last conversation had never happened. "Claire and Mark and the kids will be here. It's been too long since we were all together. You simply must come." A prickle of unease went through me. This sudden warmth felt less like a thaw and more like the heat from a carefully concealed lamp. But I pushed the feeling down. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe they had reflected and realized how inappropriate their questions had been. Hope, however battered, is a stubborn thing. So I agreed. That Sunday, I walked into the same dining room, which was now set for a larger gathering. Claire was already there, looking effortlessly chic in a cashmere sweater, while her children were settled in their usual spots on the sofa, absorbed in their digital worlds. The air was thick with the scent of roast chicken and a cloying, manufactured bonhomie. As we sat down to eat, my mother began to sigh dramatically between bites. "Oh, Richard, I was at Zupan's market yesterday, and the prices, it's just shocking. A chicken costs a fortune. And our property taxes just keep going up. I don't know how people are expected to manage." Claire picked up the thread seamlessly. "It's true," she said. shaking her head with an expression of deep concern. Mark and I are feeling the pinch, too. With 2 kids in private school and all their activities, every month is a struggle. I listened, my fork suspended over my plate. This was a choreographed performance, and I was the intended audience. My mother dabbed at the corner of her eye with a napkin, a perfect portrait of a woman beleaguered by circumstance. Then, as if on cue, Claire cleared her throat and sat up a little straighter, assuming an air of magnanimous responsibility. "I've been thinking a lot about this," she announced, looking first at our parents and then around the table. Her gaze, when it landed on me, was weighted with a kind of pitying superiority. "I think it's our duty, as their children, to help Mom and Dad. They've given us so much. I've decided I'm going to send them $700 every month. I wish it could be more, but with Mark being the sole provider, you know how it is." She let the sentence hang in the air, a testament to her own filial piety and financial constraints. Then, she turned to me, a small, tight smile playing on her lips. "But you, Alara, you're in a different position. You have your great job at the magazine and only 1 child. And, well, with your situation, you have that other income. I think you could easily manage $1,500 a month for them. Your situation." The delicate, deliberate euphemism for my husband's death felt like a physical blow. The room swam for a second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout that my situation was that I was a widow, that I was raising our son alone, that the other income was blood money, meant to build a future for the child whose father was gone. But as I looked up, I saw my mother clapping her hands together softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude. My father was beaming, a broad, proud smile on his face. "Oh, girls," my mother breathed. "You have no idea what this would mean to us. Our wonderful, generous girls." I was trapped. Every eye was on me. My sister, the self-sacrificing hero. My parents, the grateful beneficiaries. And me, the one with the other income. The words of refusal, of protest, of outrage all died in my throat. I had spent a lifetime chasing their approval, a scrap of affection, a moment of feeling good enough. And here it was, laid out before me with a clear price tag. $1,500 a month. A strange sense of resignation washed over me. It was the exhaustion of a swimmer who had been fighting a current for too long. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'll do it." The first transfer was the hardest. Watching $1,500 vanish from my account with a click of a button felt like a betrayal, to Ben, to Leo, to myself. But a small, naive part of me clung to a fragile hope. Perhaps this transaction would buy me what I truly craved. Not their love, I knew that was too much to ask, but their support. Their presence. Maybe now, when I needed help with Leo, the excuses would finally stop. That fantasy dissolved within 2 weeks. "Mom, I have a last-minute deadline for the Fall Arts Guide. Is there any chance you could get Leo from school? Martha has a dentist appointment." I asked over the phone, my voice tight with stress. "Oh, Alara, honey, I am so sorry," she replied, her voice crackling with sympathy. "I'd love to, but I have a terrible migraine coming on. I can barely lift my head from the pillow. You know how they get." This became the new normal. Each time I asked for help, a new ailment or a sudden, unbreakable engagement would materialize. Her back was acting up. She had an appointment with her garden club she'd completely forgotten about. She thought she might be coming down with a cold and didn't want to expose Leo. Yet, like clockwork, on the 1st of every month, the $1,500 left my account. One Thursday afternoon, after my mother had canceled at the last minute, claiming she needed to run errands before a storm rolled in, I sat at my desk, staring at a half-finished layout, my vision blurred by tears of frustration and helplessness. I finally called Martha, my voice thick with emotion. "Of course, dear, not a problem at all," she said, her warmth a balm on my frayed nerves. "David is already on his way. He was hoping to catch Leo anyway." They have an ongoing debate about whether a T-Rex could beat a Spinosaurus in a fight, and I think David has some new evidence to present. I hung up the phone and let my head fall into my hands. I was paying my own mother a small fortune for a litany of excuses, while my mother-in-law, who had every right to be consumed by her own grief, would move heaven and earth to be there for us, asking for nothing in return. The cost of peace, I was learning, was far higher than I had imagined, and the peace I had purchased was utterly worthless. December arrived in Portland as it always does, on a tide of silver mist and the scent of wood smoke. The city dressed itself in festive lights that shimmered on the wet pavement, casting a warm, hopeful glow against the persistent gray. Christmas had always been Ben's favorite time of year. He loved the traditions, the comforting rituals that stitched the years together. We would spend hours at Powell's City of Books, picking out the perfect story for Christmas Eve, and then drive up to the mountains to find our own lopsided, imperfect tree. The holiday had always culminated in a large, boisterous gathering at my parents' house on Christmas Eve. It was a long-standing tradition, the one time of year when the extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, came together. Despite the undercurrents of tension, I held onto memories of these gatherings, the roar of laughter, the chaotic joy of presents being unwrapped, the familiar comfort of shared history. This year, the thought of Christmas without Ben was a hollow ache in my chest. I knew it would be difficult, but for Leo's sake, I was determined to find some measure of joy, to keep the traditions alive. The phone call came exactly 1 week before Christmas. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Leo, helping him glue cotton balls onto a drawing of Santa Claus, when my phone buzzed with my mother's name. "Alara, darling," she began, her voice infused with that syrupy sweetness that I now knew was a prelude to something unpleasant. "I'm calling about Christmas Eve. Your father and I have decided to do something a bit different this year." I waited, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. "We feel it's time for a change," she continued, her tone light and airy. "We're hosting a more sophisticated affair. An adults-only party. No children." The crayon in my hand snapped, leaving a jagged red streak across Santa's beard. "What?" The word came out as a choked whisper. "Oh, it will be lovely," she chirped, completely ignoring my shock. "Good wine, stimulating adult conversation, no little ones running underfoot. It's just for one night." "But it's Christmas Eve," I protested, my voice rising. I stood and walked into the living room, out of Leo's earshot. "It's a family tradition." "What am I supposed to do with Leo?" "Oh, that's the easy part," she replied, her voice breezy and dismissive. "You can just leave him with Martha and David. They'd be thrilled to have him, I'm sure. It will be perfect. You can come around 7. She hung up before I could argue further. I stood in the middle of the room, the phone limp in my hand, staring at Leo. He was diligently trying to repair Santa's beard, his tongue sticking out from the corner of his mouth in concentration, a habit he'd inherited directly from Ben. My heart fractured. His own grandmother had just disinvited him from Christmas, and he had no idea. He was being excluded from a tradition that was supposed to be about family, about togetherness, about children. The following week was a blur of internal debate. A part of me, the angry, wounded part, wanted to refuse to go at all. But another, older part, the part that feared conflict and craved inclusion, hesitated. Skipping the family Christmas seemed like such a drastic, bridge-burning measure. I felt torn between my loyalty to my son and my lifelong, ingrained desire to keep the peace. Finally, I settled on a compromise that felt weak and unsatisfying, but manageable. I would take Leo to Martha and David's, where I knew he would be happy and cherished. I would make a brief appearance at my parents' party, exchange the gifts I had already painstakingly wrapped, and then leave to spend the real heart of Christmas Eve with my son and the people who truly loved him. It felt like a surrender, but it was the only way I could see to navigate the impossible situation. On Christmas Eve, a cold, clear night where the stars seemed to splinter in the frigid air, I pulled up to my parents' house. The long driveway was already lined with cars, more than I would have expected for a small, sophisticated gathering. As I walked up the stone path, clutching a reusable tote bag filled with brightly wrapped presents, the sound of laughter and festive music spilled out from the house, a wave of warmth in the cold night. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and opened the heavy oak door. And the world tilted on its axis. The house was not filled with adults having quiet, sophisticated conversations over glasses of wine. It was teeming with life, with family, with children. The first thing I saw was my sister Claire's children, Maya and Noah, chasing each other through the living room, wearing paper crowns from Christmas crackers. Near the towering, impeccably decorated Christmas tree, my cousin Linda's 2 toddlers were systematically pulling ornaments off the lower branches. Across the room, I saw my cousin Michael's teenage twins deep in conversation, and my cousin Susan's young daughter helping herself to a plate of cookies. The warm air in the house suddenly felt thick and suffocating. I stood frozen in the entryway, the tote bag of gifts hanging from my numb fingers. The laughter, the music, the twinkling lights, it all became a surreal, mocking backdrop to the cold, hard reality that was sinking into my soul. This was not an adults-only party. This was a family Christmas party. A party from which only one child, my child, had been deliberately and cruelly excluded. I stood there in the doorway, a ghost at a feast I was meant to attend, but whose guest of honor I had been forced to leave behind. My mind struggled to catch up with what my eyes were seeing, trying to reconcile the lie I'd been told with the vibrant, chaotic truth unfolding before me. My Aunt Caroline, my mother's younger sister and a woman with a keen sense for emotional weather, was the first to spot me. Her warm smile faltered as she took in my solitary presence. "Alara, sweetheart," she said, rushing over to envelop me in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and perfume. She pulled back, her brow furrowed with concern as she looked around. "Where's my little scientist? Don't tell me Leo's sick on Christmas Eve." Before I could find my voice, my cousin Peter chimed in from across the room. "Yeah, where's Leo? My Jake brought his new robotics kit to show him." More faces turned toward me, a sea of relatives, their expressions shifting from festive cheer to confusion. "Did you come alone, Alara? Is everything okay?" Each question was a fresh turn of a knife in a wound I hadn't even known was there moments before. My throat felt tight, my lungs constricted. I couldn't form words to explain the situation because I didn't understand it myself. Through the shifting crowd, I saw her. My mother, Helen, was in the kitchen, standing by the island, calmly arranging star-shaped sugar cookies on a festive platter. She moved with an unhurried grace, as if this was just another Christmas Eve, as if she hadn't orchestrated this breathtaking act of cruelty against her own grandson. A current of ice and fire shot through me. It was an anger so pure and clarifying that it burned away all the confusion, all the hurt, all the lifelong habit of silent compliance. "Excuse me," I murmured, my voice a stranger to my own ears as I pushed through the throng of concerned relatives. My feet carried me toward the kitchen on autopilot, each step solidifying my resolve. "Mom," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the festive din of the kitchen. "I need to speak with you. Privately." Something in my tone, a steel I had never used with her before, made her put down the cookie she was holding. Her polite hostess smile faltered. I led her into the adjoining hallway, a narrow space away from the prying eyes and ears of the party. "You told me this was an adults-only party," I said, the words precise and level. I was fighting to keep my voice from shaking, not with fear, but with rage. "You specifically told me not to bring my son. So why are Claire's children here? Why is every other child in this family here except for mine?" My mother fussed with the sleeve of her silk blouse, refusing to meet my eyes. "Well, Alara, that's different." "Different how?" I pressed, taking a step closer. "Those children," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the riot of joy in the living room, "they know how to behave. They're well-behaved. They don't disrupt things." I stared at her, incredulous. Well behaved? Mom, Leo is one of the kindest, most polite children I know. His teachers rave about him. Martha and David always say. Oh, Martha and David, she interrupted, finally looking at me with a dismissive roll of her eyes. They indulge him. They encourage his incessant questions and his intensity. It's not appropriate for a gathering like this. The other children, they deserve to be here. They fit in. They deserve to be here. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and unforgivable. As if on cue, a loud crash followed by a wail erupted from the dining room. My nephew Noah, in a fit of pique, had swiped a glass ornament off the table, and it had shattered on the hardwood floor, narrowly missing his sister's foot. I turned my gaze back to my mother, one eyebrow raised in silent, searing judgment. Yes, I said, my voice dripping with irony. I can see their superior behavior is on full display. My mother's face hardened, her expression turning from defensive to defiant. That's just children being children. It's not the same as the constant disruption of his questions. Honestly, Alara, don't be so dramatic. He's perfectly happy with his other grandparents. I'm leaving, I announced, the decision solidifying like ice in my veins. I'm going to be with my son. On Christmas Eve. Where he belongs. I turned to walk away. Fine, she said with an indifferent shrug, already turning back toward the party. Go if you want to make a scene. But leave your presents under the tree before you do. We're opening them after dinner. Her casual, transactional dismissal was the final spark on the tinder. It wasn't just about Leo anymore. It was about the $1,500 a month. It was about the lifetime of being second best. It was about the chilling realization that to my own mother, I was little more than an ATM who was expected to show up with gifts, even after my child had been cast aside. Something inside me didn't just snap, it vaporized. Without a second thought, I turned and walked back into the heart of the living room. I stood in the center of the room and cleared my throat, a loud, sharp sound that cut through the music and chatter. Conversation faltered. Heads turned. The music seemed to fade into the background. Suddenly, every eye in the room was on me. I know many of you have asked why I came alone tonight. I began, my voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. You've asked where Leo is. Why he isn't here, celebrating with his family. Claire started to move toward me, a look of alarm on her face, but I held up a hand, a gesture that was both a plea and a command. Let me finish. I took a deep breath, my gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. I'm here alone because 1 week ago, my mother called me and informed me that this was an adults-only party. I was specifically and explicitly told not to bring my son. A collective gasp went through the room. What? Aunt Caroline's voice was sharp with disbelief. But all the children are here. We weren't told anything like that. My mother stepped forward, her face flushed a blotchy red. Alara, this is neither the time nor the place. Oh, I think this is the perfect time and place, I said, my voice rising. Because there was no ban on children, was there? There was a ban on one child. My child, my son, who for reasons I cannot comprehend, was deemed not good enough to be a part of his family's Christmas. The room erupted in a low murmur of shocked and angry voices. I saw disapproving looks being shot toward my parents, who stood frozen near the fireplace. But that, I said, my voice ringing out over the noise, isn't even the most hurtful part of the story. I let out a short, bitter laugh. You see, while my son isn't considered worthy of a place at the Christmas table, I am apparently worthy enough to be my parents' personal benefactor. I've been sending them $1,500 every single month. I turned my head to look directly at my sister. And my generous sister, Claire, has been sending them $700. Claire's husband, Mark, who had been standing by the bar, turned to her, his face a mask of confusion. $700? What's $700? Claire, our credit card is maxed out. Where would that money be coming from? The color drained from my sister's face. She looked from her husband to our parents, her composure crumbling. I never actually sent them any money, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. Mom and Dad, they asked me to say I was. So that Alara would feel pressured to help them. They said she'd be more likely to agree if she thought I was contributing, too. The silence that followed was absolute, a ringing void that was more damning than any shout. In that terrible quiet, I watched the full, ugly truth dawn on the faces of my relatives. They saw the whole sordid tapestry of manipulation and greed my parents and sister had woven, using my grief and my son as their tools. Aunt Caroline's voice, when it finally broke the silence, was like the crack of a whip. Helen, Richard, are you telling me you conspired to scam your own widowed daughter out of thousands of dollars, while at the same time you banned her little boy from Christmas? You used her. You used her grief. That's not just wrong, that is monstrous. The room dissolved into chaos. Voices overlapped in anger and disgust. Mark was pulling Claire aside, his face pale with fury. My parents stood there, speechless, their carefully constructed world of respectable appearances shattering around them. I raised my hand one last time. The room, remarkably, fell quiet again, all eyes turning back to me. I have one more thing to say, I said, my voice now calm, steady, and clear. From this moment forward, the financial support ends. And so does this relationship. I am done with you, and I am done with you, Claire. I am taking my son, and I am choosing a different family. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the door. I left the tote bag of presents on the floor of the entryway. The sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind me was the most liberating sound I had ever heard. It was the end of a long, painful chapter and the beginning of my own, unwritten story. Sitting in the quiet cold of my car, the silence of the night was a balm after the storm inside my parents' house. The suburban street, with its glowing windows and festive decorations, looked peaceful, a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage I had just left behind. I pulled out my phone, my fingers surprisingly steady. I opened my banking app, navigated to the recurring payments, and found the monthly transfer to my mother's account. With a simple, decisive tap, I canceled it. It was more than a financial transaction, it was an act of severing, of cutting a toxic cord that had been draining my spirit for months. A profound sense of release washed over me, so potent it was almost dizzying. The drive across the Willamette River to Martha and David's house felt like a journey between two different worlds. I left behind a world of judgment, manipulation, and conditional affection, and drove toward one of unconditional love, safety, and acceptance. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw them through the large picture window. The living room was bathed in the warm, gentle light of the Christmas tree. David was on the floor with Leo, their heads bent together over a complicated-looking Lego creation, while Martha sat in her favorite armchair, a plate of half-decorated gingerbread men on the table beside her, watching them with a gentle smile. The sight of my son, so happy, so safe, so completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded on his behalf, brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. But these were not tears of pain or anger. They were tears of gratitude and overwhelming love. I walked in without knocking, and the moment Martha saw my face, she was on her feet. She didn't ask what was wrong. She simply opened her arms, and I walked into her embrace, finally letting the last of my composure crumble. "It's all right, dear," she murmured, stroking my hair as I sobbed against her shoulder. "Whatever it is, you're home now. You're safe." We spent the rest of Christmas Eve in that warm, loving bubble. We didn't speak of what happened at my parents' house. There would be time for that later. Instead, we decorated the rest of the cookies, Leo carefully giving each gingerbread man a unique, and often lopsided, personality. We sang carols, our voices filling the small house. And later, as he was growing sleepy, Leo helped David arrange the figures in their old, hand-carved nativity scene, his small hands placing the baby Jesus in the manger with a reverence that was both touching and sweet. This, I thought, my heart swelling, this is what family feels like. It isn't an obligation or a transaction. It's a harbor. The next morning, I woke on the guest room sofa to the smell of coffee and the quiet sounds of Christmas morning. Leo was still fast asleep, nestled under a handmade quilt, a peaceful smile on his face. My phone, which I had silenced, was lying on the end table. I picked it up to see a string of missed calls and a flood of text messages. One was from Aunt Caroline. I called her back, stepping out onto the cold, crisp air of the back porch. "Merry Christmas, Alara," she said, her voice gentle. "I figured you might want to know what happened after you left." She described a scene of utter collapse. After my departure, the party had disintegrated. Uncle Michael, my father's brother, had stood up and announced he and his family were leaving, stating he couldn't stand to be in this house another minute. That had triggered a mass exodus. One by one, the relatives had gathered their coats and their children and left, many of them making pointed comments about shame and deceit on their way out the door. "And Mark?" I asked quietly. "He was furious, Alara." "Absolutely livid," she said. "He took Maya and Noah and left. Told Claire he was taking them to his own parents for Christmas and that they had a lot to talk about. Last I saw, your sister was in tears, and your parents were just standing there, in the middle of the empty room, looking completely lost." She paused. "I want you to know we are all on your side. What they did was unforgivable. You and that wonderful boy of yours deserve so much better." I hung up the phone, a strange mix of vindication and sadness swirling within me. I scrolled through the other messages. Desperate, pleading texts from my mother. A long, rambling apology from my father. A series of messages from Claire, oscillating between self-pity and blame. "I'm so sorry. You don't understand the pressure I was under. You've ruined everything." I read each one, then, without replying, I archived the entire conversation thread. It was a conscious choice not to delete the past, but to file it away, to refuse to let it occupy my present. The week between Christmas and New Year's was a peaceful, restorative blur. Leo and I stayed with Martha and David, our days filled with simple joys, board games, long walks in the misty Oregon woods, and evenings spent by the fire, reading from the pile of books Santa had brought. We were cocooned in a world of genuine affection, and slowly, the bruised parts of my heart began to heal. Then, on the morning of New Year's Eve, the doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole and my heart gave a hard thump against my ribs. It was my parents, Richard and Helen, standing on the porch, looking smaller and more uncertain than I had ever seen them. They were holding a large, awkwardly wrapped gift. "Alara, we know you're in there," my mother called, her voice muffled by the door. "Please, darling. We just want to talk." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. A part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't there, to let them stand on the cold porch until they gave up. But another part, the part that was trying to build a new life based on strength and honesty, knew that I had to face them. I opened the door but stood my ground, blocking the entryway. "We brought this for Leo," my father said, holding out the gift. Through the thin wrapping paper, I could see the logo for an expensive, high-powered telescope. A guilt offering. "He doesn't need it," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I made no move to take it. "Please, Alara," my mother pleaded, her eyes welling with tears. "We know we were wrong. So terribly wrong. The way we treated you, the way we treated Leo, the awful business with the money. We are truly, deeply sorry. And we want you to know," my father added quickly, "this was never about the money. We feel just terrible about the whole thing." I looked at their faces, searching for a glimmer of genuine remorse, of true understanding. But all I saw was the panic of people who had lost control, whose social standing had been shattered. "I have to ask you something," I said, studying them. "Are you sorry because you understand that what you did was morally wrong? Or are you sorry because the entire family found out and now they won't speak to you?" They exchanged a quick, involuntary glance. And in that fleeting, unguarded moment, I had my answer. "I think you should leave," I said softly. There was no anger left, only a vast, sad clarity. I don't believe your apology, and I don't trust you. Not anymore. But we're your family, my mother sobbed. No, I said, shaking my head. The word was not an argument. It was a statement of fact. Family doesn't do what you did. Family doesn't manipulate and deceive. Family doesn't put a price tag on love and then exclude a child from its warmth. Whatever that was, it wasn't family. They left, still clutching the unwanted telescope, their apologies trailing behind them like exhaust fumes. I watched them walk to their car, and as they drove away, I felt not sadness, but the quiet, clean feeling of a space that has finally been cleared of clutter. In the months that followed, I cultivated my new life with the same care a gardener tends a fragile seedling. I held my boundaries firm, not with anger, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. The money that had once gone to my parents now flowed directly into a trust fund for Leo's future. And a funny thing happened when I closed the door on that toxic relationship. Other doors opened. Aunt Caroline began a new tradition of Sunday dinners at her house, chaotic, loud gatherings where Leo was not just tolerated, but celebrated. Uncle Michael and his wife invited us for summer barbecues, where my son could run wild with his cousins. They all made a point of engaging with Leo, of answering his endless questions, of delighting in the very curiosity my parents had tried to stifle. One warm July afternoon, as we sat by my uncle's pool, Leo asked, "Mom, why does the water make my eyes sting sometimes?" Before I could answer, Uncle Michael knelt beside him. "That's the chlorine, buddy," he said, launching into a detailed, fascinating explanation of water chemistry and pH balances. I watched, my heart full, as my son soaked in the knowledge, his face lit with the pure joy of understanding. He was blooming, nurtured by the sunlight of genuine love and acceptance. He calls Martha and David Grandma and Grandpa now, the words natural and easy on his tongue. They are our rock, our constant, our true north. Sometimes, late at night, I see a missed call from my mother on my phone. I no longer feel the jolt of anxiety or the pang of guilt. I simply look at it, a relic from another life, and feel a quiet sense of peace. The door to that relationship is closed. I don't know if I have locked it and thrown away the key, or if someday, far in the future, they might find a way to build a new key, one forged from honesty and genuine change. But that is their work to do, not mine. My work is here, in this small, sunlit garden of a life I am building for my son and for myself. And for the first time, it feels like enough. It feels like everything,